excited here to be with you all today. I am Jay Turtle. I'm the CEO of Growthink, and I've got three of my very esteemed colleagues with me: Anna Vitale, our Chief Client Officer; Antonio Barzagli, who is head of our London office. One of our senior engagement partners also leads our Europe, Middle East, and African practice. And we also have Predrag Milosevic, who is one of our very talented financial analysts and engagement managers. And today we're going to talk about financial models and go through really, I think, three big themes here. The first one is the role of the financial model in the overall strategy game plan for a business. Then we're going to talk about the financial model in the context of how it drives the financing, talking to prospective investors, how it gets financings across the line. I would say of everything that's done in an effort to attract investors, the financial model is probably the most material, the most important component. To the degree it's credible, that it's believed by the investors, money is invested. When it's not, it's not. And then obviously the valuation and what a company is viewed as being worth is incredibly driven by the future projections and value of the business. And then finally, we're going to get into really the nuts and bolts, where you get started and what are some of the ways to get from a blank Excel to something that really expresses the value of the business and is impressive and can be reviewed. We use the phrase institutional quality. So a high level reviewer at a private equity, a venture capital firm will look at it and it will reflect well on management, their sophistication, their understanding of the business, and can propel the business forward. So we're going to go about 20 minutes today. So we're going to get to it right away. I'm going to turn it over to Antonio for the first question. And Antonio, from your experience, talk a little bit about the strategy of the business and where a financial projections model plays into developing it and to making that strategy credible.
Thank you, Jay, and great to be here today talking about this. The financial model, for me, and I believe for our team, it's really one of the central tools to talk strategy and to review strategy for the growth of our business, of our client business. And, the strategy usually for growth has ambitious targets and figures that we want to achieve in 3 to 5 years. And so the model is a tool to break down these goals on a month-by-month level, for example, understand what initiatives we need to put in place, from marketing to revenue generation to delivery of the products and services to get to that point, understanding how potentially the hiring plan needs to increase to support that growth plan, and really validating that this strategy and initiatives that we've discussed on a qualitative level is viable from a quantitative level. And there's no really better tool than something like this. We're going to take a look at one today for doing so. And so just to recap, the main and primary purpose of a financial model is to validate the internal strategy and serve as an internal roadmap for the company.
Great. That's a natural segue, Anna, to the role of the financial model, the projections in a financing effort to a company that's looking to raise capital to help grow the company.
That's exactly right, Jay. Thank you. So when we're looking at the transition from internal planning with the financial projections to presenting to external stakeholders, typically in the case of our clients, these would be investors or buyers for their company, they're looking at the numbers to validate the credibility of the company's growth story and the allocation of capital. So how the money that they're putting into a business is going to be used, how it's going to translate into revenue and EBITDA. Now, investors and buyers will have different criteria. There'll be different stories that they want to see shown and told through the model. And Growthink is very adept and aware of what those metrics are. But overall, if an investor is looking to plug money in, to say a Series A round, they're wanting to see very high growth. They're wanting to see quick deployment of capital, to see that capital is being allocated properly, and then they want to see, really steep curve on the growth on the other end of it. That's the story in that case that our models are geared to show. And of course, as Antonio mentioned, that has to be credible. There have to be actual elements of the business that are driving and that are substantiated in support of that story. In the case of buyers, typically a little bit different, potentially a slower, more stable growth path that's supported by, similar story in the historical financials. But still, buyers want to see that, okay, if I'm paying X amount of dollars for a business, I can expect to recoup some element of that in cash flow over the next 3 to 5 years, say. So different elements that they're looking for, but overall, just presenting something that's trackable, something that makes sense to investors, something that they can read, and investors are very savvy in reading these sorts of Excel models. They will get the story if it's clear. And so that's what we're really going for when we work with clients to prepare financial projections for an investor or buyer audience.
That's great. Thank you, Anna. And Predrag, you're often tasked as a financial analyst, engagement manager, starting with a blank Excel and getting to something like you and Antonio are going to show us in a minute. So what's the first thing you do? Where do you start with getting from dead stop to starting to build a complex model like this?
Thanks, Jay. So the main thing I like to start with is really understanding the revenue streams of the company, because that is the main driver of all numbers in the model. COGS will depend on the revenue, marketing will depend on the revenue, salaries will depend on the revenue. So that's really a central piece that we like to understand deeply and present it in a unique way. That's, let's say, the most artisan part of the model. And then later you add other parts by following the standard accounting rules. But let's say the revenue streams are the heart of the model.
That's great. That's great. A lot here. Think about a blank Excel. We've got how many tabs we have here on the Excel, Antonio?
This is about 8 to 10 tabs that are connected to each other.
All right. So when we think about the model, maybe a good place to start is when you look at assumptions and being able to change assumptions and having a flow through, how important that is to a model, and maybe just give the viewers here a quick flavor of what that looks like in an actual model.
Sure. So first of all, this particular model is a redacted version of the financial model that we built for a company for which we worked on the strategic plan and then ultimately raised Series A round last year. So this one was built in Google Sheets instead of Excel. One of the reasons is that it allows teams in multiple countries and continents to work at the same time on the same model. In fact, this was shared not only with the CFO of our client's company, but also with the lead investor. And we'll talk in a second about how that was a central part of the discussion. But to your point, the dynamic nature of these models is the absolute heart of how we proceed by iterations and by adjustments and by scenario analysis. So not so much in the summary, which is an output tab that shows kind of the main indicators, but in the key assumptions tab, which has about 240 rows, everything in blue, every cell in blue text is an assumption. Okay. And
the level of complexity, it can at first glance be a bit overwhelming, but the reason being that we include all of this sort of underlying assumptions that flow into the summary, which should be very straightforward to understand, is that investors, buyers really like to drill down into these things. And even though it can look complex, it helps you answer questions as they get to very, very, granular levels and specificity with investors, having all of these tabs, having all of these assumptions. And of course, again, the summary is the user-friendly, go here first to sort of get a high-level understanding that you can then drill down to.
Antonio, I do want to jump in here. So there's complexity here, but there is incredible value creation. So part of this is maybe talk a little bit about the original amount of money that was discussed as we got into the financial model, how that number went up, and then the valuation of the business, how much of it was driven by the historicals versus the projected. So those would be some good questions to show you the value of this process.
Absolutely, that's a great story. So we went out for Series A of $10 million. And keep in mind this, we haven't said much about the company, but maybe a bit of context is helpful. This is a company that designed and manufactures a very interconnected coffee machine, IoT coffee machine, that is very unique in many ways. It is connected to the user through an app for a number of functions. It is connected to a marketplace of roasters, which allows ordering and reordering coffee when you're running low on beans. It allows to order not only coffee, but also accessories and consumables. And so it's really a coffee marketplace for coffee lovers. And it embeds the components of product sales, subscriptions, service sales, and so on. So it's a very rich offering, different from anything else. But going back to the round, we went out for this 10 million raise, and the valuation driven from the seed round and the cap table was, I would say, quite high for Series A standards. There was a lot of capital raised in the past, and sales were certainly not as high as many investors expect for a Series A round. However, I believe that this model drove the conversation in the right direction, showing that path that Anna was talking about to the investor and to the rest of the team in how we're going to do it in a very actionable way. And ultimately, the lead investor, which had a few sessions with the CFO on this model, they started discussing, this makes sense, number one, and number two, what if we deploy 5 extra million? So what if we increase the round from 10 to 15 million, slow down on the manufacturing of the machines, but invest more in building that community of users and coffee lovers? And would the model show that we can support a higher deployment of capital right now? Okay. So I'll pause here if you want to comment on this.
I want to so now that's where having these blue cells is so important, because by changing those relatively easily, you can show what the investor was looking for, which was more deployment. What would that do to the flow through to revenues? Is that a fair description?
Absolutely. They did exactly that. And at the end of that session, they concluded that it was a viable path forward to increase the round to 15 million. And that is exactly what actually happened at closing. In fact, the company also received 5 million from Silicon Valley Bank in debt to complement the equity round.
Okay, I want to stop and I want to have Anna make a comment here. She mentioned financial models for mergers and acquisitions, for looking at companies looking to sell. This was a company looking for financing. There's a lot of similarities. One area that there's complexity and requires experience is connecting the historicals to the projected with a fundraising event that's at some indeterminate time in the future. So maybe Anna, talk about that and how important that is, and some of the secrets of the secret sauce of doing that.
It is really important, and I'm glad that you brought that up, Jay. So we work really closely on our teams with company ownership to iteratively incorporate financials as they go. So Predrag, others on our team are constantly asking clients, do you have month-end financials? We want to get those in so that they're baked in and visible, and then tweaking along the way. So it's not uncommon that we get into a raise process, and as the company continues to progress and grow over the course of the engagement, assumptions need to be changed. The growth path needs to be adjusted a little bit. Maybe we figure out, we thought we were going to hire an in-house marketing person, but it's making more sense to hire an agency. So we need to make those adjustments and show growth a little bit of a different way, being driven by some sort of new marketing effort that's been uncovered. So it's a combination of both taking the numbers themselves historically and making sure those are up to date, but then also adjusting the forward-looking story to align with what's happening with the business in real time today. And that is an iterative process, and something we work very closely with our clients with, because small discoveries that are being made in the operations that have a really outsized impact on the growth story. We want to make sure we pull all of those data points in so that we're telling the most compelling story possible.
Okay, let me ping Predrag on this, because he's been through this process a number of times recently in a very intense way. When you're interfacing with a client that has a bit of a mishmash of financials in different places, from QuickBooks, NetSuite, and just on various Excels, and you need to get bank statements, you need tax returns, you need to get that into a model and organize it. What are some of the best practices, some of the ways you go about that to get that information from the client and then translate it for an investor, a buyer, or review?
Well, there's multiple important things. One is to ask for the information in time, because the clients simply sometimes need a lot of time to provide the statements. So telling everything in advance, knowing what we will need is important, but also clarifying everything immediately is another important aspect, because a small mismatch, a small mistake in a formula, if you haven't seen it at the very beginning and then you have implemented it into the model, it can cause to like significant double work later. So that would be another important aspect. And let's say the third important aspect would be to be really careful about connecting all historical financials with the projections. So we always want to make sure if all of the past assumptions, as Anna said, still make sense. So we track every month how does the marketing changes over time, how do salaries change over time, has there been a decrease or increase in COGS, and we adjust the projections every time. So we do have the old model, but very often the end result is completely different after some important changes, especially at the early stage of the business where there is a lot of changes.
Antonio, you have something to add there?
Yeah, I just want to jump in here. It's a very good point. So what happens a lot, especially in the early stage for early stage companies, is that the past financials rarely reflect the full potential of the company. Okay, and so the projections are showing not only a reasonably optimistic scenario, but they're also assuming most of the times that there is an external investment allocated to the business. And so there is oftentimes a disconnect from what the historical financials have been and what we start seeing in the projection. And so this is one of the most complex parts of the model, connecting historical with projections, and Predrag actually does it very, very, very well. But it's about linking the two and explaining what was happening before and what's is going to start to happen from the year one of our projections.
Okay, now there's a lot here, and we're talking, okay, I'm going to have everybody, you know, Anna, as our chief client officer, I'm going to prompt you on this. What kind of time to put something, if you look at something like, you know, maybe some of the recent M&A models and financial models, what kind of time are we talking here? Number of hours, over how many weeks, months to put something of this together are we talking about?
So I would say it tends to be between 40 to 60 hours of team time, and then potentially additional time with iterations on a month-by-month basis. It is a substantial amount of time for anyone. I think our team is very efficient, candidly, in terms of being able, you know, that is 40 to 60 hours. It's an efficient sort of number, I think, given the skill and experience of our team. And then on the client side, you know, there is that preparatory work, which is necessary not for creating the financial projections, for raising money, for selling your company. It's just something you have to do, but that is, you know, time investment on the part of the client.
Okay, so this is, now with that, we're going to talk about value creation. So that one of the themes we began with. So Antonio, maybe talk about the summary, showing what those out year, you know, third year, fourth year, fifth year projections are, and how that drove the valuation, validation, justification of the financing.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about value, actually, we'd like to link to what Anna just said, which is, you know, as we create this, as we review it with our client, with the controller, with the CEO, they are absorbing the rationale behind the model, and they ultimately are able to present it, right? Because the model by itself, it's a complex Excel sheet, but because of the collaboration and the multiple reviews on screen of this model, by the end of the process, there is the ability to present it and defend it live. So if we talk about value to our clients, the business, there is a tool, an ongoing tool that will continue to be used oftentimes, that not only for the raise, but also for scenario analysis internally. So that's the first thing. And then when we talk about valuation in that sense, as we know, there are certain drivers of valuation that is usually attached to revenue, top line revenue, or EBITDA as a proxy of cash flows and profitability. And oftentimes we see that as we said before, the current revenue, the current EBITDA is probably negative, right? The current revenue, it's not convincing enough to support a 20, 30, 40, 80 million valuation. And so by looking at the metrics that we plan to achieve in 12 months or 60 months from now, we're able to actually explain that we're not there yet, but we have a path to get to that point. And it's easier for an investor to digest, a much higher valuation.
Love it, love it. So maybe to wrap here, because 20 minutes is asking a lot, but we wanted to give folks a flavor of some of the process here. Maybe connect that, the end year, what are we looking at 5 years from where we were to valuation, and then maybe just talk about how that then translated into, what the valuation for a business, if I recall correctly, was not really making any money at the time, but it was able to generate financing at a very high valuation.
That's correct. So yeah, maybe we can look at the numbers a little bit,
Yep.
But the valuation, the pre-money valuation for the Series A round was around 80 million, 80, which was a huge multiplier of the company's revenue. The EBITDA was negative. The company was at the time losing money. So if you look at the revenue, the projected revenue, let's say that 2024 could be the time for an exit for the company. The projection is looking at $450 million in 2024 with an EBITDA of 132 million. So generally, companies get at an acquisition, let's say they're selling to an espresso, for example. The valuation is usually on EBITDA, and for a company of that size, you're probably looking at, I would guess, 8 to 15 times, 8 to 12 times EBITDA. So we're looking at a valuation at exit in excess of $1 billion if the company is to achieve these numbers.
Okay, so I'm gonna, in the interest of time and brevity, we're gonna wrap with that, and I want to offer a closing thought that. So what this financial, the model as an output of a lot of strategic work, a lot of future envisioning, what it's allowing a company to do is to be reviewed and valued based on its future potential and not its past financial results. And that is for almost any company, whether it's in a financing or in a business sales situation, is necessary. That the ability to get a multiple that is interesting, to get any offer, forget about what the multiple is, to get an offer of anyone saying, hey, this is a company I want to be involved with, that there has to be a picture of the future that is painted, that is credible, that's exciting, and it requires an attention to detail, and it requires folks with experience, collaboration, and as Anna was mentioning, a lot of iteration. Now, all that work, there's very few things that you can point to in business that can generate as much value as this, because we basically, the founders of this company were able to take their idea, product development, not able quite yet, as is the case with very many companies, to see the type of revenues and cash flow that we're looking for yet, but through this future envisioning process and then presented in something that was numeric, that was data-driven, analytical, they're able to unlock literally tens of millions of dollars in their business. So it's a very powerful process, a very high leverage process, and whether you do it on your own or look to a firm like ours to help you, it's one that, as all of us here, we provide our strongest urging that executives should do for their businesses on a regular basis, to put together financial projections like this. So with that, I'm going to thank Anna, Antonio, and Predrag for their thoughts and their time today, and appreciate everybody watching, and after this, I expect everybody to get right into opening up their Excel, their Google Sheets, and getting to work on their financial model. So thanks, everybody.